Introducing Thomas F. O'Neill, a young private serving in the 7th Cavalry Regiment, who found himself at the center of one of the most notorious battles in American history, known as Custer's Last Stand. Under the leadership of Major Marcus Reno, O'Neill charged into the conflict on June 25, 1876, as Native American tribes engaged the U.S. Army in a confrontation that would be remembered for its tales of valor, sacrifice, and endurance. Prepare to witness the intensity of the Battle of Little Bighorn through the perspective of a soldier who survived to recount the events. Before we proceed, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. We marched until the evening of June 23rd, when we set up camp for the night. The next day, we began our march at 4 a.m., moving along the Rosebud River, and established camp again late that evening. Around 10 p.m. that night, we received orders to prepare our horses for a night march. We continued along the trail until 4 a.m., when we paused to make coffee, resuming our journey around 6 o'clock. After several hours, we reached the head of the Rosebud. From there, we started to cross the divide between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn Rivers. Shortly after, we were ordered to stop. A call for officers was made, and all officers reported to General Custer for further instructions. This brief meeting concluded, and we were soon back in the saddle. Our scouts were actively conducting reconnaissance, reporting fresh signs of Native Americans ahead and on the sides of our column. We were now following an Indian trail, which was nearly a quarter of a mile wide in some areas, indicating that large groups of Native Americans had recently moved in the direction we were heading. As we approached within approximately 10 miles of the Little Bighorn River and the Indian encampment, Captain Benteen received orders to advance to the left in front of our column with 3 cavalry companies. He was tasked with reconnaissance and instructed to return to the main command if he did not encounter any Indians after a reasonable distance. In fact, he saw no signs of Indians until he was back in view of the river. Just as Reno's troops completed their charge across to the opposite bank of the stream, roughly 3 miles from the river, we stumbled upon a location where a small group of Indians had set up camp. Clearly, we caught them by surprise as they retreated to the larger camp by the river, leaving their cooking equipment on the fires and one teepee still standing. From this position, we galloped forward, ultimately reaching a high bank that overlooked the river, situated about a mile away on the opposite side. We spotted the Indian camp at the edge of a narrow stretch of timber where small cottonwood trees were present. At this juncture, the stream flowed closely to the steep banks, and the Indian village was partially hidden from our view by a bend in the river. However, the Indians appeared in large numbers at the edge of their camp, mounted and moving about in a state of considerable agitation. It was at this moment that General Custer commanded Major Reno to take his battalion of 3 troops across the stream to assault the camp, assuring him of support. I was part of Major Reno's battalion, and we proceeded down an old dry creek bed that led to the river nearby. Here we crossed the Little Bighorn, with the water reaching the horses' bellies. Upon reaching the opposite bank, we formed in 4s and galloped toward the Indians. When we were approximately 700 yards away, we arranged ourselves into a line of battle across the river bottom. As we approached within about 500 yards of the Indians, they opened fire on us. As the Native Americans gathered in large numbers to confront us, it became clear that our contingent of around 130 to 140 men could not possibly charge through such a larger force. Consequently, our officers opted for a defensive approach. Orders were issued to dismount and prepare for ground combat. 3 out of every 4 troopers dismounted, while the remaining soldier held the horses. A defensive line was established, with the horses positioned 6 or 7 yards behind the line. We then began to return fire at the Native Americans, whose main body was approximately 1,000 yards away, although many were circling within 500 yards, mounted and firing at us. Our right flank was near the brush, while our left extended about 200 yards across the plain, with soldiers spaced 3 yards apart along the line. At this moment, Custer's command was located on the opposite bank of the river, and the distance between our 2 columns increased as we moved forward. When the engagement began, I estimated that Custer and Reno were about 1.5 miles apart. General Custer and his 5 companies then disappeared behind a tall bluff, heading towards the lower end of the Indian village, and that was the last sighting we had of him or his command alive. From our position, we could see the village's extent, which appeared to stretch over 2 miles with teepees densely populating the river bottom and the camp spanning 700 to 800 yards in width in certain areas. Soon after, the Native Americans began to encroach upon our left flank, which was less fortified. Major Reno clearly recognized the danger of being surrounded or flanked and adjusted the line, turning our backs towards the river and orienting our right flank towards the village. It was noted that the stream had previously flowed closer to our rear position, but had since altered its course, leaving a deep ditch approximately 300 yards behind us. A contingent of 20 men, myself included, was commanded by Lieutenant McIntosh to form a skirmish line and survey the underbrush to assess the potential for an Indian attack from the rear. We encountered thick undergrowth, vines, and cottonwood trees in the vicinity, along with a significant washout near the village. After failing to locate any Indians between our position and the river, the lieutenant returned with this report. At that moment, the combat was exceedingly fierce, with the Indians audaciously charging our position. They would fire their weapons, maneuver their ponies, and quickly retreat to reload. However, we noted that they were gathering in larger numbers on our left flank, preparing to launch a flanking assault. Our officers speculated that a charge on our left flank was imminent. A brief discussion took place among the officers, who communicated instructions from their respective positions along the line. It was resolved that we should withdraw to a more defensible location, as we were incurring considerable casualties among our men and horses. Major Reno then issued the command to mount our horses. As this order was being carried out, the gunfire from our troops significantly decreased, nearly coming to a halt. This emboldened the Indians, who advanced upon us with renewed intensity and increasing numbers. Their ranks were bolstered by hundreds of additional warriors arriving from the lower end of the village every minute. Upon reaching our horses, the command to mount was given, and we were instructed to charge across the river. Each man drew his pistol, loaded his carbine, and held it ready in front of him on the saddle or suspended from his sling belt. The troopers emerged from the thicket in pairs, with those on the right flank prepared to fire in that direction, while those on the left flank focused on the opposite side. We traversed approximately 3/4 of a mile across a perfectly flat expanse before arriving at an appropriate fording location. Beyond this point, a notably steep incline awaited us, necessitating an ascent to the bluffs, during which our troops would be completely vulnerable to relentless gunfire. Each member of our small contingent appeared to fully grasp the grave situation we were in and the expectations placed upon them, to maintain a steady barrage and ensure that every shot was effective. As we broke free from the underbrush, a deafening battle cry erupted from a multitude of voices. It became a desperate struggle for survival. The Indians encircled our formation, firing upon our soldiers, who retaliated in kind. The conflict escalated to close quarters, with both Indians and soldiers attempting to unseat one another from their mounts, often succeeding after depleting their ammunition. I observed 6 or 7 of our men tumble from their horses, struck by gunfire. One unfortunate individual nearby was hit in the torso, and as he fell, was struck again in the head. I distinctly heard the sound of the bullets as they found their mark. I now found myself in the most perilous predicament I had ever encountered. Our men were succumbing, while Indians were falling from their ponies, either dead or injured. Riderless horses and ponies were galloping wildly, and the air was saturated with the cacophony of rifles, carbines, and revolvers. The cheers of our soldiers mingled with the war cries of the Indians, creating utter chaos. Before I had covered 200 yards, my horse collapsed under me, struck down by an Indian bullet. I was left on foot among the Indians, watching as my comrades moved further away. I anticipated the imminent impact of a bullet, arrow, or spear. For a brief moment, I was frozen in fear, uncertain of my next move. My first instinct was to chase after my unit, but the impracticality of such an action quickly became clear. I then resolved to make my way back to the thicket from which we had just emerged. I quickly turned around and sprinted away, fully expecting each moment to be my last. However, the Native Americans appeared focused on chasing the mounted soldiers, and many of them passed by me without noticing my presence. Some pointed their firearms at me as they sped past, and while a few fired in my direction, they missed. I aimed my carbine at those who came too close, and although I am convinced I must have injured some, whose ponies carried them away safely. I only witnessed one fall. Upon reaching the thicket and seeking refuge, I encountered Lieutenant DeRudio. Like me, his horse had been shot from beneath him, and he had endured a similar struggle to reach the thicket. The lieutenant was intently observing the retreating group, likely wishing, as I did, to be part of it. I felt immense relief at seeing him, even in such dangerous circumstances. Until that moment, I believed I was the only unfortunate soul left behind. The lieutenant then informed me that two others, like us, had also been left behind and were just a few yards away. It turned out that the two men were Billy Jackson, one of our half-breed scouts, and Fred Gerard, an interpreter. Lieutenant DeRudio gathered us and quickly instructed us on what to do in case of an Indian attack, which we anticipated at any moment, as our hiding place seemed unlikely to remain undiscovered. We lay in a depression or ancient riverbed, surrounded by dense underbrush that effectively concealed us from the view of the Indians. They rode back and forth on the plain before us, mere feet away, their excitement palpable, resembling a disturbed ant's nest, each one focused on their own objective. The lieutenant commanded us not to fire until we were discovered, and we braced ourselves for the inevitable. We lay on our stomachs, our heads level with the top of the hole, vigilantly scanning our surroundings in different directions, ready to fire simultaneously at any approaching Indians. Lieutenant DeRudio maintained a watchful eye in all directions, his gaze sharp and reassuring. He stated that we must ultimately confront death, and we should do so with courage. Nevertheless, I remain hopeful that we can evade this dire situation. Soon after, several women approached our location to gather their deceased and injured. Their cries were heart-wrenching as they mourned their losses. They desecrated the bodies of our fallen comrades with their knives, and witnessing such horrors left me feeling faint and nauseated. The fear of meeting a similar fate weighed heavily on my mind, compelling me to resolve to fight fiercely if discovered. Given our advantageous position, we believed we could eliminate several attackers before being overwhelmed. I could not discern Lieutenant DeRudio's optimism, but mine had completely faded. I had no expectation of surviving. My life flashed before my eyes, taking me back to my childhood home in the East and to friends long forgotten. These memories momentarily distracted me from the imminent danger we faced. Hours passed, 1, 2, 3, without any attempt to capture us or any sign of discovery. We remained hidden until darkness enveloped the plain. After a quiet discussion, we resolved to seek out the command. The lieutenant whispered that if any survivors remained, which we doubted, the Indians would not engage at night. He expressed confidence that if we stayed together and followed his orders, we would reach the command safely. We were unaware of the fates of Custer or Reno. The intense gunfire we had heard both upstream and downstream indicated significant losses. I personally believe that the silence from Custer's direction around 5 o'clock suggested his retreat to Reno's position. Major Reno's command continued to fire intermittently, indicating they were under siege. However, their firing also ceased as night fell. We spoke in low voices, cautious of being overheard by the Indians. At this point, we decided to leave our hiding spot, a risky decision even in the cover of darkness. We carefully examined our surroundings, listening intently, but heard nothing. The moon illuminated the night sky, albeit faintly through a veil of haze. We made the decision to take a desperate chance for survival, as it was our sole option. Remaining in our current location until dawn posed too great a risk. We had endured an entire day without sustenance, and the oppressive heat had left us parched. I felt an acute thirst, exacerbated by a fall during the skirmish that resulted in significant bleeding from my nose. With no opportunity to address the injury, the blood had trickled down my throat, nearly suffocating me. My thirst was nearly unbearable, and I feared I might succumb to it before finding water. As we emerged from the thicket, Gerard and Jackson were mounted on ponies they had concealed in the underbrush, while the lieutenant and I continued on foot. We had only traveled a short distance when we stumbled upon a horrific scene. We found ourselves at the site where our command had engaged the Indians during their retreat. The savages had overwhelmed them, leaving several men dead, stripped, and mutilated by the squad's knives. We did not linger, as all the men were beyond our assistance. We followed the trail marked by the lifeless bodies of troopers and horses in the dim light. As we neared the river, we spotted a group of mounted Indians, numbering 8 or 10, approximately 100 yards away. The lieutenant and I tried to hide behind the ponies ridden by Gerard and Jackson, hoping to blend in with the Indians. However, they appeared wary and fled in the opposite direction, which relieved us. We quickened our pace and soon reached the river at the point where the command had hastily crossed during their frantic retreat. We scanned the opposite bank for any indication of where they had ascended the steep bluff, but all we could see was a dark, towering bank. Nearby, there seemed to be a flat area along the river bottom, roughly 50 yards wide. The lieutenant urged me to enter the water and assess its depth while holding onto the bushes at the edge. I descended into the water, which was nearly neck deep and had a strong current that nearly swept me away. With the lieutenant's help, I quickly emerged from the stream. However, he was not content until he had tested the water himself. I supported him as he entered the current, but he concluded that crossing at that location was impossible. This was our first opportunity to drink after many long, exhausting hours, so I removed my large slouch hat, which could hold about a gallon, filled it from the stream, and shared it among the men. Each individual drank until satisfied, and we unanimously agreed it was the sweetest water we had ever tasted. As night approached, we carefully searched the bank of the fast-flowing stream for a crossing point. Due to the melting snow in the mountains during this season, all streams in the area were nearly overflowing, making it a perilous endeavor. Behind us and downriver, we could see and hear large groups of Indians performing a war dance around blazing piles of wood and brush. The flames illuminated the area, allowing us to distinctly see the Indians as they jumped and brandished their weapons. I will never forget the eerie sight of those warriors, their yells and whoops echoing throughout the valley. The only musical accompaniment was a repetitive ha 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 ha. We later discovered that they had the heads of 3 of our comrades, who had been partially burned in the fires by these savages. It appeared that even the women were participating in the frenzied dances. From the commotion, it was evident that the Indians had experienced a successful day. Since we had not heard from our comrades since nightfall, we suspected they had taken the opportunity to retreat further. One thing was certain: our only hope for safety lay in crossing to the other side of the river. We proceeded cautiously upstream, attempting to locate a suitable crossing point, but our efforts were in vain. Consequently, we resolved to return to the location where the command had successfully crossed earlier in the afternoon during the initial assault on the village. Upon reaching a point that appeared to offer a potential crossing, I waded in and found the current to be gentler, with the water rising just above my knees. The others followed suit, and we crossed what we believed to be the main channel, only to later realize we were on an island. The river branched shortly upstream, flowing on either side of this substantial landmass, which extended nearly a mile in length and several hundred yards in width, adorned with dense clusters of blueberry bushes, some covering as much as 20 square yards. Additionally, the island featured young cottonwood trees and tall, coarse grass that reached our waists. We traversed the island diagonally, convinced we had reached the opposite bank, but were abruptly confronted by the river once more, leaving us quite perplexed. In our earlier account of the afternoon's attack, we had overlooked this island, leading us to question whether we had become disoriented. We attempted to cross the main channel again, but it proved futile, as the only sight before us was steep bluffs that were insurmountable. While we cautiously navigated the area, we stumbled upon one of the dense clusters of blueberry bushes, and a startled voice suddenly called out to us. The deep, guttural tones belonged to an Indian, prompting Gerard and Jackson to swiftly turn their ponies and gallop away in the direction from which we had come. That was the last we saw of them until we reunited in camp the following night. Lieutenant DeRudio and I were approximately 10 yards apart when the challenge was issued. I observed him kneeling in the tall grass and quickly followed his lead. If we had chosen to flee, we would have had to traverse an open area of nearly 100 yards before reaching the safety of the brush clumps, where the Indians would undoubtedly have fired upon us. After Jackson and Gerard rode away, the Indians seemed to sense something amiss, as they hastily urged their horses into the river in a state of confusion. To hasten their escape, Lieutenant DeRudio discharged 2 shots from his revolver in rapid succession. I aimed my carbine in their direction and fired a shot after them. While I was reloading, the lieutenant fired another shot. By that time, they had already crossed the river. I had not visually identified any of them, only heard the commotion, but the lieutenant, being closer to the river, reported seeing 6 or 7 Indians stationed at the fork of the river where it split to form the island. Just as I was preparing to take a second shot, Derudio shouted, "O'Neill, they are all gone." It is possible that the Indians were somewhat fatigued from their earlier skirmish, and we caught them off guard. I believe it was around 2 o'clock at that moment. We retreated a few hundred yards and wandered on the island, perplexed by our surroundings of both water and Indians. Following this encounter, we were hesitant to approach the fort in the afternoon for fear of encountering more Indian sentries after having walked back and forth along the main stream. In a futile search for a crossing, I became so exhausted that I implored the lieutenant to allow us to rest, stating that my boots were filled with water and my clothes were soaked and I wished to wring them out. Thus we settled in a thicket of brush where I removed some of my garments, including my boots and stockings. Having just finished wringing out my drenched clothing, I began to put them back on when we were once again startled by the sound of horses' hooves and voices. We were unaware that morning was approaching until we realized how late it had become. The Native Americans were advancing along the riverbank, preparing to launch another assault on Reno's command. The lieutenant had donned his boots while I was still struggling with mine. He stood up and peered outside. A group of mounted soldiers was passing by approximately 200 or 300 yards away. In a hushed tone, he called to me, expressing his belief that it was the command. By that time, I had managed to put on my boots and joined him. I could see the horsemen, but in the dim light of dawn, I could not identify them. They were numerous enough that we could hear their voices, but some had ascended the bluff through a cut in the bank that we had not previously noticed. The lieutenant pointed out a man in a buckskin outfit, whom he believed to be Captain Tom Custer, as he had worn similar attire on this expedition. Derudio whispered with excitement, asserting that it must be Tom Custer. Some of the horsemen were scaling the steep banks on the opposite side of the river, with a few already at the top, able to see the island where we were situated. The rider we assumed to be Tom Custer was just ascending the cut. I was nearly overwhelmed with joy at the thought of reuniting with my comrades. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Derudio boldly stepped onto the riverbank and called out, "Hey, Tom Custer! Tom Custer!" The rider halted and glanced in our direction, and in an instant, a war whoop erupted, followed by a volley of at least 50 shots directed at us. It is nothing short of a miracle that we escaped unharmed, as bullets whizzed through the brush surrounding us from all angles. The riders consisted entirely of Sioux Indians, clad in uniforms they had appropriated. We later discovered from Custer's troops, who had engaged in battle the previous afternoon, that they were mounted on horses from the 7th Cavalry that they had seized. Our escape during this incident was nothing short of miraculous. None of the Indians attempted to pursue us across the river. We quickly dove into the bushes on the opposite bank from our original position and, keeping low, made our way toward another thicket, ensuring that only our backs were visible above the grass. This strategy allowed us to reach another dense area of brush, but just as we were about to navigate around it, we unexpectedly encountered another group of mounted Indians. We were so close that we nearly collided with one another. This group consisted of 6 or 7 Indians, and our sudden appearance startled them, causing their ponies to rear up and become agitated. Clearly, this party had not anticipated our presence from that direction, although some of the warriors on the hill were shouting warnings to their comrades below, likely alerting them to be vigilant for us. I had my carbine ready. The lieutenant had been holding his pistol for hours and immediately opened fire. I also began shooting at them. The Indian ponies were rearing, snorting, and thrashing about to such an extent that their riders struggled to maintain their seats without using their weapons. This chaos ultimately saved our lives. Amidst their disarray, we fired 8 shots at them. I am certain that 2 of the riders fell, and I witnessed 3 ponies galloping away without their riders. I believe we must have injured others who managed to stay on their mounts. This encounter was decidedly one-sided. We held the advantage of being grounded and were able to deliver a swift and effective barrage of fire. We stood shoulder to shoulder. I did not even raise my carbine to my shoulder. The Native Americans were so near that I merely aimed in their direction and pulled the trigger. Although I hardly anticipated surviving for more than 5 minutes, I felt immense satisfaction in having caused significant harm to the enemy in the brief time we had. I have often pondered whether those Indians who managed to escape alive viewed us as two demons they encountered on that gray June morning, inflicting such considerable damage in a short span. The lieutenant was a swift and precise revolver marksman, firing 5 shots and undoubtedly hitting his target each time. Meanwhile, I discharged 3 rounds at the little island, which provided an ideal defensive position with ample cover. Previously, several cottonwood trees had been felled at this location, leaving stumps approximately 3 feet high. A recent flood had washed numerous fallen logs against these stumps, creating a small angle that formed an excellent breastwork for firing. Lieutenant DeRudio quickly recognized the advantageous position and urged, "Hurry, O'Neill, get in." He leaped among the fallen logs, and I followed suit. We burrowed deeper into the debris, finding ourselves completely shielded by the logs. For any Indians to reach us, they would first need to traverse an open area of nearly 100 yards and then scale our barricade. We shook hands, affirming that we could not flee any further. If we were to perish, as it seemed inevitable, we would do so fighting at that spot. I removed my cartridge belt and discovered I had only 25 rounds remaining for the carbine and 12 for the pistol. Since the lieutenant was a superior marksman with a pistol, I entrusted him with my weapon along with his own and the necessary ammunition, while I kept the carbine for myself. Upon our arrival at this refuge, we were met with the sound of intense gunfire from the hills, approximately a mile away. The Indians had once again launched an assault on Reno's unit. We could hear our fellow soldiers responding effectively. Additionally, we could hear the Indian leaders rallying their warriors from the riverbank. Although several shots were directed towards us, we remained concealed and refrained from returning fire. Throughout this time, we anticipated a potential charge from the Indians, scanning our surroundings vigilantly. The terrain behind us sloped down to the river, situated about 200 yards away, and we had a clear area of nearly 100 yards around us. The tall grass provided cover, and we maintained a watchful eye to prevent any Indians from sneaking up on our position. We believed that if they did charge, we would be able to take down 5 or 6 of them. I doubted they were fully aware of our exact location, as several of their bullets struck the logs behind which we were taking cover. Occasionally, we caught glimpses of them in small groups, but they never approached closer than 250 yards. Thus, we remained still and did not fire, as we wished to avoid attracting their attention. The lieutenant advised me that when they entered the clearing and appeared to be searching for us, I should aim carefully at the foremost Indian and maintain fire as they advanced, but only shoot when I was absolutely certain of my aim. During target practice, I could consistently hit a target the size of my hat at 200 yards. My nerves had settled, desperation had calmed me, and I felt as steady as I ever had, capable of excellent shooting. We hardly expected to survive this encounter, yet the lieutenant insisted it was our duty to defend ourselves for as long as we could and to the best of our abilities. Surrendering was futile, as it would only lead to a death marked by extreme suffering. At this juncture, a second assault was launched against the troops positioned on the hill, resulting once more in the Indians being driven back. Subsequently, sporadic gunfire was exchanged by the indigenous forces. As we would later discover, the Indians managed to inflict significant casualties during the lulls between their attacks. It was now approximately 9 o'clock in the morning on the 26th, and we found ourselves pondering how long the Indians would postpone their efforts to locate us. We spoke in hushed tones, and the lieutenant remarked, "O'Neill, I suspect they are hesitant to pursue us. They are uncertain of our exact location and realize that their losses would outweigh any potential gains. The lesson we imparted to them earlier may ultimately be our means of survival. To be continued."